Good evening, class. This is Deborah Pennuto, and we are in Relational Psychology. Tonight's PowerPoint is on perception and culture. And we start off by defining web-based social cognition. Since social cognition is the way in which people process, remember, and use information in social contexts, well then web-based social cognition therefore refers to the acuities we make about ourselves and others based on the information one provides online. How many of us know friends or family members that post those pictures or messages on Facebook that are in direct contradiction of who they really are? Have you ever seen those? Anyone who sees or experiences the individual solely based on their post is seeing them through an obscured lens. It's limited and likely to cause one to have bias that could mislead the viewer or the reader. And in explaining how culture relates to our perception of others and of ourselves, one could discover through their own culture and understand the complexity with which we perceive others and ourselves. It influences the way we see the world, and allow me to explain that. I'm Sicilian American. Growing up, we spoke the Sicilian dialect in our home because our grandmother lived with us and she never learned the English language. She was a woman who lived through World War II in Sicily. She bartered eggs and sugar for fresh water, milk for the children, and oil and flour. She kept her family safe while hiding in caves in the mountainsides of her hometown near Palermo, Sicily. She had 4 children at that time, ages 3 to 10, and another on the way. She was fearless and strong, and she only stood 5'2". She taught both my mother and my aunt, her only 2 daughters, to live with the same strength and conviction as she did, unwavering in her decision to progress as proposed. I heard the stories of the bombings and the days they went without food. I remember my grandmother telling us how she begged the soldiers to let them live and how she would feed them. These accounts were daily reminders to my mother and to me that you must persevere. No matter the obstacle before you, walk through it. These were the types of conversations my grandmother would have with me. She compared women of her time to the women here in the States. She made fun of the Americans who went shopping in their fancy clothes and high heels and bought shopping carts filled with foods that could last for months. She was a woman who never drove a car. My grandmother walked everywhere. She walked to the grocery store in modest shoes, and never did she own a cart or a wagon to carry home her groceries. She did, however, carry 3 or 4 brown bags on her own, the length of 2 football fields to get home. You see, in Sicily, where she grew up and lived until 1955, everyone walked everywhere. They pretty much still do. Meat, produce, even bread, always fresh, and the farmers and the bakers would push their carts through the streets and come sell their goods right outside your door. There were no grocery stores, and families did not own freezers to store their food. You bought what you needed for the day and maybe for the next day. Culture takes root in the societal norms of a population. The same culture that shaped my grandmother as a young woman, wife, and mother during those years also shaped her daughter's life, who in turn shaped mine. You see, our Sicilian culture is still very much alive in all that we do. Culture impacts how people think and the way they understand that which motivates them. Our focus is around family and food and company and hospitality. This is because culture into which one is born will shape even your eating habits, physical habits, emotional expressions, style, and all other forms of life experiences. Sicilians enjoy spending time with family. And this is why it's common that in Sicily, all the shops close between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. so that families can go and have long lunches together and enjoy themselves. They create this relaxing atmosphere. Do these perceptions vary across cultures? I believe that they do to some degree. People gain perception based on their life experiences. And so one's perception will never be exactly equal to someone else's. This will vary across cultures, but may remain similar through generations, depending on the familiar and cultural ties, as well as continuity of the same. Perception happens through process. We select, we organize, we interpret what we see or experience. Each of us will select based on our cultural relationship. What is important to us? What's important to you? This differs between cultures. As we begin to manage that data, we make these lists in our heads and we group these things together, those things that are in common with other cultures. Naturally, there are differences here too. Then the third and final part of this process is interpreting all of that data. That's where we give value to the selected and the organized information. If two cultures share similarities, well, their perceptions are often common or shared. Here I give you an example of something I have not experienced with any other culture, at least none that I know. The Sicilian culture has a language all its own. It's often spoken through hand gestures, facial expression, and even odd movements with our heads. One can offend a man even without speaking a word. Is something that might mean something offensive to another man. In the same way, he can compliment a woman's cooking skills or show approval through a head movement or a hand gesture. This means the food was really good. Interesting, huh? It is quite interesting, I think. Cultural opposites, two that really don't attract, I have found. After researching the Arab and Middle Eastern cultures, specifically Saudi Arabia, in contrast, of course, with the United States, there are some comparisons, mostly contrasts, but it's kind of difficult to find similarities in these two cultures. But a few important ones do, in fact, exist. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that's what it's called, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, their road infrastructures are actually similar to that of the Americans. But as I read further along, I learned that this was true because these roads were planned, designed, and built by American firms. Go figure. Education and health in these two countries are something else that are similar. Over the past 10 years, Saudi Arabia has heavily invested in their education. And more importantly, that education includes their women. Contrast key differences. In the family infrastructure, Americans share responsibilities and authorities across genders. Moms and dads share their responsibilities. We both change diapers, right? While the Saudis are patriarchal in nature, the father is the absolute ruler within the family. We're also fortunate to live in a democracy. We have the ability and the responsibility, to choose the person who would lead our country in the direction best suited for all of us, while Saudi Arabia is run by a king. Well, today he's still a prince, but while both countries have rules and laws, that which govern the Americas have been built on an open society over time and with a judiciary system. In contrast, Saudi Arabia is based on Sharia Islamic law, following their Holy Quran teachings. Some of the things that surprised me the most, information that surprised me and saddened me a little, was the oppression against women. They're not allowed to even drive cars in public, nor can they mix genders in public. There exists no possibility to grab a coffee with your male counterpart after work. It is against the law to do so. There's also no movie theaters there. They've been banned for 50 years. However, here's the good part. The new crown prince has decided to make significant cultural changes that would catapult Saudi Arabia to becoming a vibrant modern city where women can drive, and they will start soon, and movie theaters will open before year's end. Interesting. I believe that this has somewhat changed my perception, not so much. With regards to my previous impression about this particular culture with the Saudis, no, I believe the research has actually broadened my perception or previous impression about Saudi Arabia's culture, and it's done so in a practical way. It's apparent that by these recent advances that the deep-rooted culture is changing, and for the better. Much like the fabric woven together to create the United States of America, so too will Saudi Arabia's traditional and fundamental values transform over time to create a better country. In this video, Burrell states so beautifully that when people adapt to your ways or conform to the whole society, then you can truly benefit from diversity. He goes on to explain that this implies there exists learning, observing, and understanding the behaviors of others and adapting your own so that it fits within the behaviors of the society that you're in. It would seem that this young prince has been watching, listening, and learning from the previous rulers who have failed to create a more cohesive country. Godspeed to this prince and Saudi Arabia, and to the changes that are to come for their country. Thank you.